Like, the fact that annual leave is seen as a benefit in the US is crazy to me. Or, well, healthcare is also seen as a benefit, not a right. Anyway, I love you, Australia. Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Ashley here. I wanted to chat today about Australian work culture versus American work culture, which is something still to this day that I find so interesting and I still struggle with. There is definitely a lot of trauma built up still with just the American work system. So I really wanted to delve into and react to some Australian work culture videos. I've been living in Australia for over 2.5 years now. First 2 years in Tasmania. Last 6-ish months been here in Melbourne and loving it, and let's get into it.
So the first thing first, let's talk about the work hours in Australia. Now, work hours will vary depending upon the arrangements you have with your employer and the industry you are working in as well. Most of the full-time workers are expected to work around 38 hours per week, but sometimes you could be asked for additional overtime work hours.
So this is interesting. So I do work full-time here in Australia, and I have worked full-time in a different position in Australia as well. I was a retail store manager full-time for a bit, and now I'm doing marine biology full-time, which is awesome because that's actually what I want to be doing with my life. But it's interesting to hear about the 38 hours. I don't know if this is, because I guess growing up in the States, I was always told, oh yeah, it's 40-hour work weeks, 9 to 5, 40-hour work weeks. So I don't know if it's just the way breaks are calculated and how that's different. I'm interested if people do get into that.
But if we are generally talking about office hours, it's between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. from Monday to Friday.
I hope that these videos give a bit more context because in the US it's very similar. Typical office hours are 9 to 5, but I'm curious to hear other countries what that's like, so that's not much different than what I'm used to. But it's interesting that he talks about overtime because don't get me wrong, the US has so many different issues with wages and overtime. Like, I've talked so much about American tipping culture and wages and why that's a mess if you want to head up there. Getting paid for overtime, my retail job, I did not get paid overtime. They were very, like, we really don't want to ever have to pay overtime, so just do this instead. Like, finding any way possible to get around it. So I've actually never gotten overtime in Australia.
So now usually the breaks are dictated by the Fair Work Act, which gives a complete guide regarding your breaks during your work hours.
Yes, breaks are different here in Australia.
You could be getting a 15-minute break. If you're working for, let's say, 7 hours, then you could be getting a couple of breaks, maybe one for 15 minutes, another one for half an hour or so. And if you're working even longer, then you tend to get even longer breaks.
Yeah, basically they vary. And I don't know, is it different by state here in Australia? Obviously, I know very much like office jobs, retail jobs, and hospitality jobs, breaks are very different. So I feel like it's hard to give like a blanket, like, yes, this is the case for everywhere.
To usually pay you a minimum wage set out by the Fair Work Australia. Fair Work Australia is a body that looks after workplaces here in Australia, making sure that the workplaces are treating their employees fairly.
Yes, so interesting because, I mean, no surprise, but we don't have something like that in the US, where we have this body like Fair Work here in Australia that you can file complaints if you aren't being paid properly or there's some shady stuff going on in the background, which unfortunately definitely happens. So that is definitely a massive difference here in Australia, like a good difference.
$21.38. And this is the minimum wage from the 1st of July 2022 to 30th of June 2020.
That is insane. I know I've talked so many times about minimum wage and how much higher it is in Australia. And yes, people can go off to me in the comments or whatever about, oh, well, the conversion rate with the USD to AUD, like the Australian dollar is doing horrible against the US dollar at the moment. Yes, but even when you account for conversion rates and cost of living, yes, there is a cost of living crisis, not only in Australia, so it's not exclusive to Australia. Even taking all of those into account, as an American hearing minimum wage being $21, even converting that to USD is what, 14, 15 at the moment USD? That is insane. That is insane. In the best way possible, but that is insane. Apologies, my camera battery died, but we are back.
From 1st of July 2023, it is expected that there will be a new minimum wage.
Also, that's a really interesting point, is that there's a very strict, I guess, time frame for how often the minimum wage does get raised in Australia, whereas at least federally. It's so different in the States because with all the different laws between the states and then the federal government. I don't know enough about the current semantics of the US because I haven't been there. I haven't been living there in almost 3 years, but yeah, super interesting, super interesting.
You will be working in Australia, you will be seeing that most of the time the employers use direct communication, which means if someone has to say something to you, they would rather say to you directly. So whenever you have anything to ask or clarify.
This is really interesting because I would say being American, this is quite a normal communication style for employers. So again, I'm really interested the perspective of where this is coming from and what other communication styles people do use in the workplace.
As you know, Australians like to abbreviate everything, so they will try to use their slangs during the work hours as well, which makes sometimes things very interesting, especially if you don't understand things. And if
so true. I've said this so many times, but anyone who moves to another country and it's not their native language, one, I give you so much credit. But me going from a native English speaking country to another native English speaking country, I was like, okay, I didn't think I would have to worry that much about it, understanding English. When I first moved to Australia, I never had so much trouble understanding the English language. It was actually quite insane with all of the slang. So I can't imagine specifically moving internationally and that's not your native language and trying to understand slang while also trying to like adjust to a workplace culture as well. That sounds extremely stressful, and anyone who's done that, props to you, because that, oh my gosh, slang, still to this day, there are so many things I have no idea what Australians are saying still. I have no idea.
Now let's talk about the Australian workplace hierarchy. Typically the Australian workplaces are less formal in their hierarchy. A lot of times you could see a horizontal sort of hierarchy as well, where there may not be lots of layers of management, supervisors and so on.
It is so much more chill here in Australia with any sort of hierarchy. Like I've mentioned before, like in the States, it's very custom to people want to be addressed with like, oh, Dr. so-and-so, whereas here it's just like, just call me by your, like my first name, I don't really care. It's a lot more relaxed and informal. Even emails, like the emails I send out here are so different than the ones I would send out in the States. It's very much using nicknames or like very informal emails with like no dear so-and-so or hello so-and-so. It's literally just like a sentence and not even like a send off, like a thanks or anything. You just hit send. It's quite crazy. I've become really accustomed to it and it's quite relaxing in a way. What's the word? Just easy to get used to. It's very comforting.
Flat or a horizontal sort of hierarchy, which means let's start talking about Australian workplace diversity. As you know, Australia is a multicultural country with 1 in 4 Australian born overseas or their family born overseas, which makes our Australian workplaces diverse and very multicultural. Australia, you will be working with people from all different type of backgrounds.
Oh, Luna's here. Hello. Nope, that is not anything for cats to play with. I did not know that 1 in 4 Australians are born overseas. That is really nice to hear. I love the fun facts about diversity. Again, I don't want to get super political with the US, but because the US has a lot of problems, but also I'm a firm believer that yes, the US has a lot of problems, but there's also a lot of great things about the US, but one thing that is not great is the diversity, that is for sure. So it's very comforting to hear that Australia is racking in those stats, because especially being someone who is from abroad, it's really nice to know that a lot of people who do come from overseas hopefully feel more welcome.
Now when it comes to greeting someone, Australians like to do a firm handshake. So make sure when you're meeting someone, you look into the eyes and...
Is that true? I don't think I've ever given someone a handshake. No. I don't know, maybe I just work in really informal work culture, but is that true? Luna, no.
A quick personal opinion about Australian workplace culture from someone who has been working here for more than 16 years, and that's me. Overall, my personal experience in most of the Australian workplaces has been great. Usually people are very respectful. There is no such discrimination at workplaces. People treat you here very fairly and you do the same back to them as well.
Very interesting. I will have his video linked down below. I would also agree that I do think that overall in Australia, in the workplace, it's been quite respectful. Of course, very much depends. I would say my worst experiences were in hospitality, but I don't necessarily think that's surprising because I would say in the US, my worst experiences were in hospitality. But let's get another opinion on Australian work culture.
Australian workplaces and Australian people in general are super relaxed and very, very laid back. Australians also tend to be super friendly and always laughing and smiling and making jokes.
Sometimes too relaxed. I would argue there has definitely been times in the workplace here in Australia where I'm like, please care more, please. Please, I'm going insane. I feel crazy that I care so much. Please care more. Why are you so laid back? But I mean, that's also very much like the very New York uptight work culture that I'm used to in the States, being very, very fast-paced, and not mentioned in the first video, but just the fact that I feel a lot more comfortable taking time off work and knowing that I will not lose my job. And annual leave accrues and time in lieu and all of that stuff, having a lot more allocated. All of that is still a shock to me, but I love it so much. Thank you, Australia, because oh my gosh. Like, the fact that annual leave is seen as a benefit in the US is crazy to me. Or, well, healthcare is also seen as a benefit, not a right. Anyway, I love you, Australia.
You call everyone by their first name or nicknames, and if you have a bit of a long name, for example, if your name is Susan, they're going to call you S, so they call you by your initials.
I've not experienced that with initials. Maybe that's just because my name's quite easy to have a nickname. It's just, Ash.
Another great thing that I love about working in Australia is that workplaces tend to be very multicultural. So it's likely that you'll have colleagues from all over the world, but also colleagues who are from your same country. And
yeah, I do love that. At my current workplace, most of the team is international, and it's so refreshing because yes, there are some Australians, but it's very much like, oh, okay, you're from a different country and you are going through these culture shocks, or you're not used to this, or oh, I want to hear about your home country or something. And it is so interesting, and it just brings such a great dynamic to the workplace. I 10,000% agree.
You know, or your boss or your colleague, you usually kiss them on the cheek, and this is not appropriate here.
Yeah, no kissing, greeting in Australia and also in the US, so that's nothing new. No.
In the Australian workplace, someone says something to you and you didn't get that or you didn't understand it. Instead of saying what, say sorry, pardon. Can you say that?
Wait, this is so true. So this is really interesting. Shout out to when I was living in Tasmania. I remember running into one of my first Americans at the Salamanca market, and she was like, Ashley, if I have one tip for you, if you can't understand something, or if you're responding in some way, don't say what. And I was like, what do you mean? Because that's just such a habit, especially in the States. And she was saying that the person she was talking to thought that it was really rude to say what. And so it's super interesting to hear someone else say this. I've definitely become a lot more accustomed living in Australia, instead saying what Living Simply Australia is saying with sorry. I don't really say pardon, but it sounds quite British. But I'd be like, oh, sorry? Which is so interesting. Side note.
And if you are late, let your manager or the person who you're having a meeting with know that you're going to be late, and yeah, just give them a heads up.
Such a great custom, especially when I was managing at one of my last jobs. If you're running late, just please let me know. Please let me know. Just be honest with me. I would much appreciate that.
Before coming to Australia, I had never ever tried Indian food in my life. The truth is that I never really had access to it. It's not very common in my country. So when one of my colleagues from India heard this, she couldn't believe it. So the following day, she cooked and brought me a dal makhani, which is an amazing Indian dish. And since then, I've loved Indian food. It's one of my favorite foods in the world. If I hadn't been working here, I would have never been exposed to these kind of cultures. Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about Australian workplaces.
So true. Also, similarly, the first time I had Indian was when I was visiting the UK, however many years ago. And complete side note, but just the Asian cuisine in Australia is unmatched compared to what's in the US. So good. Love good Indian food.
After work drinks, it's also very common in Australia. This usually happens on Fridays or Thursdays, but it can be any day of the week. After a long day at work, you go to the pub with your colleagues and have a beer and snacks and just talk about life in general.
Yes, I loved this. This first happened actually with my lab that I was in Tasmania. And I loved it. I found it as such a great way to build community and stuff outside of work hours, whether you choose to chat about work or life or whatever, and get to know people that are in your workplace or your lab or whatever the circumstances is. Oh my gosh, that is such a great point. I didn't even think about that because I don't think I ever had anything like that in the US at all. And yeah, same thing, it was on Fridays and it was so nice. We would get happy hour deal at Jack Green in Hobart, shout out. Such a good point. Oh my goodness. I hope you learned something from this video. I know I sure did. And please chat in the comments about different things that you've noticed in workplace culture, whether it is from watching this video comparing to where you're from, or if you've moved abroad and have experienced different working cultures, please let me know. I could go on for days and days about the different work cultures and how different Australia is to the US and just different things that I find day to day still. So make sure you subscribe too. It would mean a lot. I am close to 10K and I appreciate you guys. I'll have these videos linked down below if you want to go check them out, and please support them because I have seen some of their content before. Yeah, I will catch you guys next time. Bye.